folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review. Today's review is the first part in a three-part series looking at Chord Electronics' top-of-the-range DACs and the M scaler here as part of the picture to make a really endgame system, whether you're using the Chord Qutest or the Chord Hugo TT2. So today's first part is really focusing on how much of an improvement the M scaler can make to the Chord Qutest, and then answering the question of whether, if you've got a Qutest now, whether you should buy the M scaler as the first upgrade or whether you should jump to the Hugo TT2 as your first upgrade and then potentially add the M scaler later on. I'll try to answer that question as clearly as I can by the end of the video, but first I want to take you through a few bits of information to help you make that decision. Now first, let's talk a little bit about pricing. So starting off with the M scaler, which is a $7,500 Australian dollar device, or just shy of $5,000 US. Up next to it with the Chord Qutest, you've got a $2,500 Australian dollar device, which is roughly about $1,700 US. So combined, we're looking at a system right here of 10,000 Australian dollars or around $6,500 US. So it's a significant investment in your audio setup. And the big question is, should you spend that sort of money with the Qutest, upgrading it with the M scaler, or is it better, if you've got that much money to spend, to maybe look elsewhere within the Chord range, such as the Hugo TT2? To put that in perspective, the Hugo TT2 is 8,500 Australian dollars, or around about 5,500 US. So the cost of the M scaler is a little bit lower than the TT2, but with the TT2, you're getting things like a preamplifier, a headphone amplifier, Bluetooth connectivity. So there's a few things going for it that the M scaler can't do. The question is the M scaler's improvement big enough to make it worthwhile alongside the Qutest? Now, for those that aren't familiar with the M scaler, let me explain what it is. The M scaler is an upscaling device, and that means it's not a DAC on its own, but instead what it does is it sits between your source device, whether it be a computer, a CD player, an SACD player. It sits between that device and the DAC itself. Now, it can technically work with other brand DACs, but to get the most out of it, you will need a Chord DAC, because the M scaler has two BNC outputs that can connect to the two BNC inputs on something like the Chord Qutest or the Hugo TT2. And that's going to allow the M scaler to deliver 768 kilohertz sample rate signals through to your Chord DAC. So before we start talking about the design of the devices, let's talk a bit about what upscaling is doing and not doing. The M scaler is designed to take any incoming signal, and so let's say, for the sake of argument, it's a 44.1 kilohertz CD audio quality file or a FLAC file at that standard Redbook CD quality. What the M scaler is going to do is take that signal coming in and upscale it from 44.1 all the way up to 705.6 kilohertz if it's starting at a 44.1 kilohertz file. If you're starting with a 96 kilohertz file, it's going to take it all the way to 768 kilohertz. So massive amounts of upscaling. Now, what that upscaling is intended to do is not replace any data. That's actually impossible. So the data that is in the original digital file is all of the data you're ever going to get. What the M scaler seeks to do better by doing the upscaling is rebuilding the pieces of information that sit between each sample from that digital data. Now, if you haven't seen my interviews with Rob Watts, it's probably worth jumping over there to hear the explanation of how this works from him. But basically what he was saying was that within a digital file, you've got a series of samples. Now, in between each of those samples, there is a certain amount of time at which the musical signal is not being captured. It's a series of snapshots rather than one permanent continuous piece of recording. And so what the M scaler is seeking to do through some mathematical algorithms is recreate the subtle changes in the sound wave that were going on between each sample. According to the theories that Rob's working with, if you want to completely recreate a digital signal, you basically have to run a reconstruction algorithm an infinite number of times to fill in the gaps of what the music was doing in between the samples. Now, just to be clear, we can sample at, say, 44.1 kilohertz, and that's going to capture every single frequency that our ears can hear. So this is not about our ability to hear from 20 to 20,000 hertz, or most of us are actually less than that range. It's not about that. It's about the rapid changes in the audio signal that are occurring from the combination of different instruments, their textures, their timbres, the way sounds might be bouncing off the wall in a recording studio or a live venue. All of that information is constantly changing very rapidly, and that's the sort of detail that gets missed by the digital samples. So the M-scaler seeks to rebuild that with those algorithms. And indeed, every DAC on the market is seeking to rebuild that lost information. All of them do it quite well, you could say very well. According to Rob's theories and logic, the M-scaler is able to do that better by applying 1 million taps. Now, when we start talking about taps, what we're basically referring to is the processing ability of the DAC to revisit the same part of the signal over and over again and reapply that same reconstruction filter. To put everything into context here, the Chord Qutest has about 50,000 taps, just under 50,000 taps. The TT2 over here has just under 100,000 taps. The M-scaler has 1 million taps. So that means it is going to look at that same signal 1 million times, each individual sort of piece of the sampling puzzle 1 million times before it feeds it through to the DAC and then obviously out the analog stage and into your headphone amplifier or amplifier. So in theory, the M-scaler should give you the best possible recreation of the audio signal, the original audio signal that you can get on the market today. That's the theory behind it. Now, I'm not going to say whether it does or it doesn't give the best possible sound on the market. What I am going to talk about is whether it is a significant improvement over the stock sound from the Qutest and how the combination of the Qutest and the M-scaler compares to the TT2. But before I do that, let's talk a bit about the form factors and the features and the design. So if you haven't already watched my review of the Chord Qutest, it's probably worth doing that now. I'm not going to go into all of the ins and outs of how the Qutest works. All you need to know for this review is that it's a basic DAC. It is just a DAC. It takes a digital signal in and it spits out an audio signal, an analog signal through a pair of RCAs. Now, in the case of working with the M-scaler, it's got these two BNCs here. That's where the signal comes in at the full 768 kilohertz. As you'll also notice, it's quite a small, even though solid, a small brick of aluminium. So when you put it next to something like the M-scaler, it does look kind of silly. And that's one of my first drawbacks with this pairing, is that aesthetically, it's not a particularly pleasing combination. Now, from a color point of view, you can get the M-scaler in black, so it's not about a matter of matching the colors, it's the physical size and shape of these devices is just so different. Even though there's obviously some similar design cues with the colored buttons, you've got the viewing window here, and on top of the M-scaler, you've got a viewing window that doesn't go through to the circuitry, but does have some printed information on the inside, such as the Made in England stamp, etc. So it's not a great design combination from my point of view. I think if I was to have these set up, I'd probably have them side by side because stacking them, I think, looks a little bit silly. And certainly if you want to stack them, the Qutest really has to sit right at the back of the M-scaler, because if you do bring it forwards, the cables are going to be draping off the back of the M-scaler, rubbing against the top of the M-scaler, and I just don't think it's a good setup that way. Now let's talk quickly about the M-scaler itself. This is designed in the same footprint as the TT2, so it's quite a large block of aluminium once again, about the size, it's a little bit smaller than your average LP, and it's got a series of buttons along the front and a series of outputs and inputs on the back. So there's not a lot going on here, but I'll talk through some of it just really quickly here. First of all, on the back, we've got a power input. It takes a 15-volt input. It also has BNC in, optical in, and USB in. So you've got two digital inputs for each of BNC and optical. You've then got an optical out, a standard SPDIF out for, say, running to a different DAC that just wants coaxial or BNC. And then you've got your dual BNCs designed to run to your Chord Qutest or your Chord Hugo TT2. So on the front here, you've got a series of buttons starting with the video button. Now I'm going to talk more about the video button in the review with the Hugo TT2, so make sure you hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss out when I do drop that review. Moving on from the video button for now, we've got the input button and you've also got an output sample rate button. And that's really key for some of the testing I've been doing. You can very quickly bypass the upscaling of the M-scaler in order to just send the standard digital signal straight from whatever the source is via the M-scaler into your DAC. So you can very quickly hear what's happening when the M-scaler is active, as well as A/Bing with what it sounds like when you're missing the benefits of the M-scaler. So that makes this kind of review very, very simple. It also means that you can step through different sample rates should you want to, but realistically the benefit with the M-scaler is that you're just going to upsample all the way to its maximum when using it with a Chord DAC. Finally, over here we've got some DX buttons. Apparently this is for future technologies coming from Chord. I don't yet know what they are, are. What I can tell you is that the first light here, which is the DX output button, that will actually light up currently to show you the sample rate coming into the M scaler. And that's quite handy if you want to quickly at a glance know how high the incoming sample rate is, because we know that whatever's coming out of the M scaler is going to be at that 706 or 768 kilohertz sample rate. Thanks for watching past the ad breaks, folks. If you're looking for ad-free content, it's over on Patreon, so do have a look at the link below and check out if you're interested in one of the tiers there. Ad-free content is just one of the benefits that patrons enjoy. They also get things like behind-the-scenes footage, early release of content, and a few other benefits that I've got coming in the pipeline, just to name a few. Moving on with the review now, the combination of the M scaler and the Qutest, I wanted to talk a little bit about what features that's giving you when you combine the two together. So essentially the Qutest is still just going to be the Qutest, and that means that you're still only going to get a single analog RCA output. So there's no balanced, there's only a single output, there's no variable outputs, so it's still a very, very basic setup in terms of your outputs. What is improving in terms of the features is you're getting a lot more inputs available to you. So all of a sudden, because the M scaler is the thing that receives the incoming digital signal, you've now got two BNCs or SPDIFs if you use an adapter, you've got two optical inputs, and you've got the USB input. So that's more than the Qutest offers on its own, but that's really the only benefit you're getting in terms of features. Once again, if you want to know a bit more about some of the other features of the Qutest, such as the filters and the like, do have a look at the review on the channel. I've explained it all in great detail there. In terms of compatibility, as you might have already surmised, the M scaler is going to handle pretty much any format you can send at it. As I said before, whether it's 44.1 all the way through to your high sample rate DSD files, the M scaler is going to handle pretty much anything, as is the Qutest. So there's not really much of a change there. And I will talk a bit more about some of the inputs and outputs and how different sample rates are handled by the M scaler. I'll talk about that in the M scaler and TT2 review. So remember to subscribe for that one if you're interested. So let's cut to the chase now and talk about the sound. Pairing up the Qutest and the M scaler, the things that I immediately heard was a greater sense of resolution at all frequencies. And I specified all frequencies because it was as apparent in the bass texture and clarity as it was all the way through to the treble. So literally every single part of the frequency range is improved by the M scaler. And it's not insignificant. It's a really noticeable improvement that is immediately apparent to the first track you listen to. Another thing I noticed was a better overall sense of space within the soundstage, a larger overall soundstage, and better sense of clarity in terms of the size and shape of the soundstage as well. It becomes particularly evident on binaural recordings, which are already really good at describing that size and shape of the room that you're in. So listening to something like Amber Rubath's session from the 17th Ward really gives you a sense of the space that she was in, where she was positioned in that space, the size and shape of the crowd. All of that is far clearer using the M scaler compared to the Qutest. Now I say far clearer, it doesn't change the character of the DAC. So you don't suddenly hear a different tonality or a different style of presentation. It just takes everything the Qutest does and improves on it. And so from that point of view, I have known some people to be, let's say, unimpressed with the M scaler. They've listened to it and they've decided it wasn't worth the money. I can definitely understand that because it doesn't hit you in the face with differences. It's not like you suddenly hear extra treble or extra bass or anything like that. It just improves everything that's already there. So I think that's a really important point to understand. It's not going to change the character of the Qutest. If you're happy with the Qutest tonality and signature and you want to just get that little bit of extra space and soundstage definition and texture and clarity, the M scaler is going to do that for you. If you're looking for a much more energetic or upfront type of sound, that's not what the M scaler is going to do for you. It doesn't change those characteristics of the Qutest. I thought one of the best ways to put all this into context was to do a comparison of the Qutest and the M scaler up against the Chord Hugo TT2 on its own without the M scaler. So we're talking now about a comparison of essentially a $10,000 setup, talking Australian dollars, versus an $8,500 Australian dollar setup. So there's still a fairly significant price difference between the two, and therefore you'd want to make sure that the Qutest and the M scaler is noticeably outperforming the TT2, otherwise you'd save some pennies and just buy the TT2. So putting the two side by side, what I found was that the Solo TT2 came across as a little bit more forward and a little bit more energetic. And initially that made me feel like perhaps it was retrieving more detail and providing more resolution in the sound. And that's one of the tricks with our perception of audio. We tend to think things that are a little bit brighter and a little bit more etched, we think of those as more detailed, but the reality is it's often not the case. As I'll explain in a second, what the M scale has proved to me is that the better the reconstruction of the original signal and the more accurate the analog output signal is to the original recording, the smoother and cleaner that music is going to sound. So when we're hearing a slight etchness from the DAC, what we're actually hearing is an imperfect reconstruction of the audio signal. Continuing on with the comparison, what I found was that the soundstage was a bit flatter from the TT2. Now the TT2 does produce an outstanding soundstage on its own merits, and I'll talk about that much more in part 2 of this series when I just focus on the TT2. But I'd say that when I went from the TT2 through to the Qutest M-Scaler combo, I could definitely hear a greater sense of space and depth in the soundstage. So that was another benefit of adding the M-Scaler to the Qutest. As I've already alluded to, the M-Scaler Qutest combo initially comes across perhaps as a little bit warmer than the TT2. Now, the reason for that, as I've already addressed, is that there's not that slight edge to the sound, and that's because the M-Scaler is doing a better job at fully reconstructing the audio signal. So at first glance, if you're listening to this combo, you may actually think it's made it warmer. But if you listen a little bit longer, what you'll realize is that all of the treble detail is still there, and in fact it's probably got more resolution than it did before, but it's lost a slight edge that it would have had before. And so it's an improvement through subtraction in some cases, and that initially can come across as a negative. But if you give it a little bit of time, you listen to a few extra tracks, what you'll find is there's now a whole nother layer of detail that was not evident before. It's worth pointing out though that these changes are subtle. They're noticeable, and I would say they're significant, but they're subtle. And what I also found was it did depend to a degree on the music that I was listening to and how well that was recorded. The better the original mastering and recording, the better the ability of the M-Scaler to recreate the full picture of what was going on in the studio or the venue at the time. One song where I heard a really noticeable difference by using the M-Scaler was in Nemesis by Benjamin Clementine. So in that track, the piano with the M-Scaler has a whole level of harmonic richness and detail that's not present when the Qutest is playing by itself or when I'm using the TT2. Again, both sound great, but there's this extra layer unlocked by the powers of the M-Scaler. On top of that, there's this percussive stick sound that sounds like drumsticks or similar being hit together, and those are more clearly defined within space and in their location when using the M-Scaler. Interestingly, what I also found was that the sound from those percussive sticks actually seemed to start and end more cleanly with the M-Scaler. It was like it was better able to define the beginning and the end of the sound in between perhaps some of those samples. I have to admit that when I started out on this review, I didn't expect the Qutest and the M-Scaler to be as good as the TT2 in isolation. I expected the TT2's significant improvement in taps compared to the Qutest, combined with a much better output stage, to result in a sound quality that was still going to be better than what the Qutest with the M-Scaler could do. Now obviously the increase in taps between the Qutest and the TT2 does become irrelevant when you add the M-Scaler, because it's the M-Scaler's taps that are doing that reconstruction. So we are talking about a 1,000,000 taps system versus a 100,000 taps system. But I did expect the output stage to play a significant part in the TT2's sound quality compared to the Qutest. What my testing has revealed is that the quality of sound from the M-Scaler and the Qutest is still better than the sound from the TT2, and noticeably and significantly better than the TT2. The big question then really comes down to your use case and what your current setup is. So if you're sitting there today with the Qutest and you're wondering, should you upgrade to the TT2 or should you add an M-Scaler to your Qutest, what I would say is, if you're happy with a single analog output and that's all you need, then just go and buy yourself an M-Scaler. It is absolutely going to be the best investment you make, rather than going out and buying the TT2 on its own. However, if you like the built-in headphone amplifier and the variable outputs, and you like the ability to then go and further upgrade it later by adding the M-Scaler to the TT2, then I would say definitely start with the TT2 and look to add the M-Scaler when you can. What I'm going to say now, and I don't want to give too much away, but what I'll talk about now is that the TT2 is a phenomenal piece of equipment, and that's coming up in part 2 of this series as the review of that one. And then adding the M-Scaler to it again takes it to a whole nother level compared to what the Qutest and the M-Scaler does. So essentially, if you're going to put these systems in tiers, it would be TT2 on its own is the first tier. The Qutest and the M-Scaler is the second tier. And for the ultimate level sound, you're going to be pairing the M-Scaler and the TT2 for the best possible sound you can get, short of perhaps going to the Chord Dave. And I'm just talking here about Chord products, so I'm not talking about comparisons with anything else on the market. I'm just working with what I have here for comparison. So That's how I'd split it down. If you're happy with the Qutest functionality and all you need is a single RCA output, no variable, no headphone outs, etc., the Qutest plus M-Scale is the go for you. But if you want the ability to go truly endgame and you're happy to step up slowly, I would go for the TT2 and look to add the M-Scaler when you can. So if you do want to hear more about the TT2 and then the M-Scaler TT2 combo, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell. As I said before, I am going to scatter some other reviews in and amongst this 3-part series just to keep things a bit varied and diverse on the channel. So make sure you subscribe and hit the bell, keep an eye out, and I'll be dropping these next 2 parts as soon as I can. In the meantime, keep the suggestions of test tracks coming. They've been absolutely fantastic and I'll be mentioning some of them in my TT2 review. But for now, happy listening and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.